Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Protecting cattle from BRD infection is critical to safeguarding both cattle health and operational profitability. However, when multiple endotoxin containing gram negative vaccines are used simultaneously, endotoxin stacking can occur, leading to vaccine related stress. Joining us to talk about how low endotoxin vaccines can help protect cattle and minimize vaccine stress is Dr. Jeremi Wurtz, beef cattle technical consultant for Elanco Animal Health. Dr. Wurtz, welcome. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
For those of you that are tuning in our audience, if you have any questions, feel free to post those there in the chat area on your screen. If you're joining us from social media, post those directly in your social feed. So let's start by having you give us a bit of information on your background and your role there at Elanco Animal Health, Jeremi.
Yeah, so my name's, like I said, Dr. Jeremi Wurtz. I'm a veterinarian with Elanco Animal Health on the beef side. I grew up in Nebraska, in eastern Nebraska, raising cattle, corn, and beans. We had kind of some purebred Simmental genetics and still kind of involved with agriculture quite a bit as I've kind of grown. I did my undergrad at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in animal science and focused on biochemistry, and then was part of the Iowa State program for veterinary school, and then practiced private practice, mostly doing cow-calf and feedlot and some stocker program stuff with a little bit of mixed animal work when practiced in Southeast Iowa for a few years, and then also practiced in Nebraska for a few years before coming to Elanco a couple years ago.
Very good. Let's have you explain in non-scientific terms what endotoxin load is exactly and why it matters what endotoxin load is when it's delivered to a cow through vaccines. Give us kind of an overview, if you would, please.
Yeah, and I think first off, let's kind of define what an endotoxin is. And so an endotoxin, and it's also referred to as a lipopolysaccharide, is part of gram-negative bacteria cell wall. And one of the most common sources of endotoxin exposure in cattle is through either vaccination with bacterial vaccines or through a natural infection. And if we use individual vaccines or use multiple vaccines in a vaccination protocol, it can contain significant amounts. Now, when we think about gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria, we kind of have to go back to high school biology. And when I think of gram-negative bacteria in the cattle industry that we deal with most often, specifically when we think about respiratory pathogens, we're thinking about Mannheimia hemolytica, Histophilus somni, Pasteurella multocida. And so when we compare the difference between gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria is those gram-negative have a very large cell wall as part of their outer membrane. Now that becomes important for a couple of reasons. One is that those components can be used as antigens, and an antigen is part of a bacteria or virus that is used to create a vaccine to stimulate the immune system to develop antibodies. Now we can use some of those components to our advantage, but also they can cause some negative effects when they interact with the immune system as well. And so, like I said, they can enter into the animal a couple different ways. One through a natural infection, such as like Mannheimia, or through components of a vaccine. And as these bacteria cell die off or are targeted by the immune system for destruction, such as like by a white blood cell, they can release these endotoxins to free endotoxin, and it kind of causes a negative cascade effect through the immune system that releases these inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-1, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor. Now, the names of those cytokines are not really important right now, but they're good to understand what these lead to. This cascade leads to where these calves will have a fever, decreased feed intake, depression, ill thrift, and certainly they can kind of get into extreme cases where we have vascular damage to the lungs that look like BRD. So when we think about what these calves look like, it looks like they're just kind of doggy, ill thrift, and not doing well.
So then what role do endotoxins play in cattle immune response, and what are the risks of high endotoxin loads?
Yeah, so certainly the poor performance of those calves post-vaccination can cause like what we call vaccine sweat. And so that's like, hey, a day after we vaccinate calves, they're acting, I like to use the term doggy. They just look kind of tough. They may have their head down. They may kind of be kind of got some snotty noses or some nasal discharge. And so a lot of times those calves are just feeling tough. Kind of like if you have a vaccination and you kind of feel tough after it. Hey, I kind of feel a little flu-like, or I got a tetanus shot and my arm feels like it's going to fall off for a couple of days. That's kind of what we call a post-vaccine reaction. And if we have some of those negative reactions, then those calves can kind of have some issues going on. It can be as severe that those calves actually get some vascular damage to their lungs that looks like respiratory disease. Now, not all calves are going to experience this post-vaccination. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And specifically when we think about endotoxin stacking is when we start using multiple gram-negative vaccines together at the same time. And so that's a pretty common thing to do when we think about our vaccine protocols. You think about like a branding age calf, a spring-born branding age calf that's going to grass, may get a pink eye vaccine, may get a Mannheimia vaccine, may also get a Somnus vaccine. And now we're getting a lot of those gram-negatives on top of there, let alone some of the other effects that we can have from our vaccines from, say, like 7-way Clostridials have a little bit of endotoxin, even though those are gram-positives. There's still a little bit in those. So it is a cumulative of effect that we start using more and more and more. And it is dose dependent too. So more endotoxin is usually kind of result in more negativity. But like I said, not all calves are going to have a negative response to that. A lot of factors go into that. What affects those sensitivities of those calves? And specifically, it's maturity or age of the calf, weight plays a role, previous health conditions, their nutritional status, stress, like if you got calves on arrival that had like a 15-hour drive, or if calves that came from southern regions where the weather was very nice and pleasant, up to where I'm at in Nebraska, which is not very pleasant this week at all. So changes in weather can also play a huge role. We would love to be able to vaccinate our calves on a 70-degree day with the sun shining and the birds chirping. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And so sometimes those types of things and weather changes and the stress associated with that can cause those calves to be more sensitive too. Now, there's no magic threshold of like, well, we have to be below this number of endotoxin units. It's all those factors play into a role in how a calf's going to affect it. So generally, when I think about, a 9-weight yearling calf is going to be less sensitive than, say, like a 3-weight calf that's just been freshly weaned. And so there's a lot of things that go into factors of how those calves are going to respond.
So given all of that, what would be an effective treatment strategy that cattle producers can adopt that also takes into effect the endotoxin load management? What's your recommendation just overall?
Yeah, so I think one of the things is we have to definitely look at our calves and think about what is our protocol for these calves based on some of the stress factors associated with them. Hey, these are young calves, or these are high-risk calves that had a long travel, maybe were commingled in a sale pavilion, and things that would consider them high risk and make them more vulnerable to an endotoxin load affecting them negatively. Now, also when you think about the stacking component as well, if we think about adding our vaccines together, and generally we like to process calves and be one and done. And maybe that's not the right process of giving 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different vaccines at one time. Generally, in the industry, it's accepted that we kind of give 2 or 3 at the most gram-negative bacteria vaccines to a calf at one time. And so I think working with your herd health veterinarian to design a protocol that's specific not only for your operation, but to that load of calves that's coming in, or for your ranch-raised calves, or for your operations home-raised calves. I also think handling of vaccines is very important. When we think about how we handle our vaccines from a temperature standpoint is very, very important. We need to make sure that we are following those labels for the temperature regulation very, very well. And the reason why is if we have a product that gets frozen, like a shipment of vaccine got left on the back porch after delivery and we found it the next day, that frozen product, and then we thaw it back out, those ice crystals in that product have damaged that vaccine and has released a lot more of that endotoxin. And so then now you can have a lot more negative effect. no different than in heat stress. So making sure that we're using proper coolers. Everyone's got those coolers now that have the pistol grip syringe holders in them. Those are great for helping maintain your temperature so you don't get any frozen product or you don't get any overheated product that could cause damage to your vaccine and cause more free endotoxin to be released. And now all of a sudden you've got more negative effects to those calves. And then certainly when we go to agitate our products, a lot of these combination products such as like Nuplura 5 or Pyramid 5 pre-spawns have to be reconstituted. And when we shake those products too vigorously, we can also damage it as well. And so it's really, really important that we agitate slowly. And I usually tend to say you invert and roll back and forth to get those products to agitate instead of going there and shaking it like a paint shaker. But then also I think we can utilize vaccines that are generally low in endotoxin amounts. And that's one of the things that's really, really popular with me with Nuplura, which is a product from Elanco. It is a Mannheimia product, that vaccine that is known to have a low amount of endotoxin and is really smooth on calves. And the reason it's done that way is it's due to the way it's manufactured. And essentially, we're not putting a lot of endotoxin load in there because we're utilizing the leukotoxin or the leukotoxin toxoid that's created in a proprietary way to put in there. So we don't have to put the whole Mannheimia cell into the vaccine and have a lot of that extra endotoxin like some other competitor products. And so to have an all-encompassing practice is, I think, to lower endotoxin is decide what vaccines you need for your cattle and work with your veterinarian on that. And then also handle your vaccines appropriately so to not to damage them. And then use low endotoxin vaccines such as Nuplura in a herd health program to really kind of mitigate or not add to any other problems with endotoxins with other vaccines.
What final thoughts, key takeaways do you want to leave our audience with here today?
Yeah, I think when it comes to vaccine use, we've got to be a little bit cautious about being too aggressive. We want to think that we can just find everything we can in the bottom of that bottle. And I think management of those calves plays a big role as well. And then utilizing the right vaccine, the right time on the right individual calf, I think is really important moving forward. And so management plays a huge role in making sure that those calves are set up for success when we do have a processing day or vaccine day.
Very good. Dr. Jeremi Wurtz, Beef Cattle Technical Consultant for Elanco Animal Health. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Likewise, we appreciate all of you tuning in and being with us here today. Until next time, for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.